Here we go, first tutorial. This year I've set myself the goal to complete small challenges to improve my Blender skills. For this I will show you how you go from this can of beans to this final animation in less than 15 minutes. Let's go!
Before I started, I took a photo of the can label. We will need that later for texturing. I also collected multiple references to know how my environment should look like, and saved everything in PureRef to have my references in mind. Okay, after making sure we know what we want to build, open a new blend file and delete everything. Add a sphere with a radius of 6 meters, delete half the vertices and extrude it to the ground. Delete the top of the roof and add a grid. Now you can use proportional editing to move the top up and build your garden dome structure. Once I had a rough shape, I duplicated the object and added a wireframe modifier to get the struts around the glass. Now I have to think about how to implement the product in the shot. I really like the idea of a fallen supply box breaking through the roof. So I moved the faces down a bit from the top and deleted some of the edges to get that blasted look. It's necessary to work with more or less realistic scales, so I added a cube of human height to get the proportions right. Then just a few more cut and extrude operations to finish the rough shape. For the glass pieces I simply used the knife tool to cut through the faces. Here you can be creative and find your inner Picasso to get the destroyed post-apocalyptic look of your dreams. Make sure you extrude the glass inwards to give it some depth. This is necessary for proper rendering. I wanted large stone tiles to cover the floor, so I added a plane, extruded upwards and beveled the edges. I used 2 array modifiers to cover the whole scene and applied them so I could UV unwrap each tile to get a unique non-repeating pattern for the textures. For texturing I used to 80% the Blender Kit add-on. There you can find a lot of models, textures, HDRI and more, and a lot of stuff you can import for free. I started modeling the rough block out of the scene, flower boxes to cover the sides to get some leading lines in the frame and have something to fill with foreground detail and life. One thing I can really recommend is fixing your general lighting early on. Adjusting your sunlight and HDRI is good to handle for your system in the state of progress. For the glass of the dome, I layered several glass materials to get a very matte and frosted look. Layering materials can give your objects more life. And I do this in a lot of my projects. It is a lot of experimenting what looks good and what doesn't, but in the end you can achieve a very pleasing result. Another thing I can recommend is to keep the scene simple. For background assets that are not clearly visible, you can use image textures instead of models. In this case I used image of trees to get the outlines in the background. This will also add depth to your scene. For the parachute I added a plane and subdivided it 8 times to give the cloth sim something to work with. Around the broken roof you can select individual vertices and add them to a new vertex group. This will keep the side of the parachute on top of the roof. Add a cloth sim to the plane and change the mass per vertex to 0.15. For my project I changed tension and compression to 20, shear to 30 and bend to 15. As last step you can apply the vertex group you just created, check skewing, increase the collision quality to 4 and let it run. Add a subdivision surface modifier, increase the count and shade smooth your object to make it more appealing. After that you can tweak your model with proportional editing to make sure everything lines up with the roof. A very important thing for any project is fast render time. So to minimize the needed computing power, I added fake volumetric rays to the scene. To get them, add a cube and scale it on the Z-axis. Add a copy rotation constraint to get the same rotation angle as your sun. Now you can adjust the size and length and duplicate it several times until you get a nice result. But the real magic happens in the shader editor. Add an emission shader and plug it into the volume output. Add a gradient and a Voronoi texture, change the scale to something like 9 and change the gradient to a spherical one. Connect it to nodes with a mixed color node to a color ramp. To make sure you have a ray and not a cube of light, change the position values to -0.5 and the scale of the Z-axis to 0 to get an infinitely scaled ray. Assign your volume material to the other rays in your scene and voila, volumetric rays rendered in seconds. For the vegetation I used the Graswald add-on. It allows you to scatter blends on any object you want. On the website you can find the free G-scatter add-on, as well as some free grass and plant assets. The assets really helped me to bring my scene to life. The trick is to add multiple layers of vegetation to increase the realism of the scene. Make sure you work with your camera and add detail in the foreground. And don't get confused about the color space naming of my image nodes. I use an ACES Osho instead of the default, but it's a topic for a separate video. One of the most important parts of the scene is the Cordyceps fungus. I really want to get that crawling along the walls effect combined with little hairs to add more detail. To do this, I will use the fungus generator built into Blender called IvyGen. Make sure you put your 3D cursor on the right place, uncheck raw leaves and click on Add New Ivy. Now you can adjust the settings until you get a nice result. In the path settings you can keyframe the start and the end mapping of the Cordyceps to animate the growing effect and make your fungus climb along the wall. Don't lose sight of your camera animation and make sure the grow effect is always visible in the camera view. Now create 3 simple curves for your hair. Set the origin to the geometry and move them into a new collection. You can place them anywhere in your viewport as long as they are out of camera view. I will use a geometry node setup for the hair. Add a distribute points on faces in a join geometry node. Duplicate your group input and plug it into the join geometry node to get your points back. For later, I will add a isViewport node. With this node plugged in, the hair count will not rise above a certain number in the viewport. Drag your collection of hair from the outliner into your node setup. Add an instance to points node and place it in front of your join geometry node. Now you can connect the geometry information from your collection to the instance input of the instance on points node. Also make sure you check the separate and reset children checkboxes. Next, connect the rotation of your distribute points on faces node to the rotation input of the instance on points node. Add a curve to mesh and a curve circle node to give your hair some geometry. Make sure you set the radius to a very small number, or you will get a big blob. With the spline parameter node connected to a math node set to subtract, you can control the radius of your curve. Make sure you plug it into the second input and set the first value to 1. Plug the subtract node into the radius of a set curve radius node. For more control over scaling and rotation, add a rotate instances node and a scale instances node. With a random value, you can control the spread. Set the max values to 0.5 and the set value to pi. Use the inverted numbers for your minimum values. After that, you can duplicate the node and set it to float. For the second random value node, you can use a minimum and a maximum value between 0.2 and 1. Now we go back to the isViewport node. Add a switch node, change it to float and plug the isViewport node into the switch. Now you can set your viewport value to something low and your render value to something much higher. This means that when the isViewport node is plugged into the switch node, the viewport will use the true value because we are in the viewport. As soon as you start your render, the higher number will be used because we are no longer in the viewport. As last node, you can add a set material node and choose your preferred material. For my Cordyceps, I simply used a principled BSDF with a little bit higher clear coat. Okay, now that the scene is set up, we need to fill the details. I use Quixel Bridge to find assets to add in the foreground near the camera. If you use the assets in Unreal Engine, you can use them for free at the moment. If you make your projects in Blender, you have to pay for a monthly subscription. But in my eyes, the money is more than worth it for what I get. I really like the dried leaves, so I export them into my project. Back in Blender, I add a plane and apply the imported material. Make sure everything fits properly in material mode, and now you can start duplicating and building your foreground elements. There's no limit to how much you can add. It depends on your personal preferences and the references you have collected to begin with. But always make sure you are happy with the look of your scene and be critical of yourself. The next important thing for realism are birds, because birds are like moths. For the implementation, I use the particle library add-on. It offers some nice presets that you can tweak until you get a nice result. Just play around with the placement of the emitter and the attractor. I added a sphere as a collision object to help the birds find their way out of the dome. The box is a skin from the Quixel Megascan library. Since the box was probably transported by plane before it broke to the roof, I added straw as padding. The modeling is very simple. Add a sphere, extrude it upwards, add some loop cuts and bevel it. Delete the faces and extrude it inwards to give the straw depth. For texturing, you can just search for an image of straw. Add the image texture and place it correctly on the straw with Project from View. To distribute the straw in the box, add a plane and give it a particle system. Increase the number of particles, set render as object and adjust the shape of the plane. The final object is the can of beans. Just add a cylinder and take the dimensions of the can you photographed the label from. Add 2 loop cuts and scale the edges with S. Select all faces of the edge with Alt-Shift and move them outwards with extrude faces along normals. In Edge Select mode, select the edges on the border and bevel them. For the label, select the faces in the middle and duplicate them. Press P to make its own object. In Edit mode, look at where the cut of the label is in your original can and create a seam there with a mark seam. Then press U and unwrap. For the pattern on the lid, press I for insert faces and repeat at even intervals until you have the right number of divisions. Then always select the middle edges and move them down. Do the same for the side of the can, loop cuts, bevel, scale inwards until you have the right shape. Now you can give your can a simple brush steel material. When you duplicated label object the image texture you photographed. After that the scene is more or less finished. A few small adjustments here and there. I added a sign that I photoscanned a few months ago. The scan took less than 5 minutes and I can now use it in all projects. This method is not only good for background assets, the scans also have enough detail for medium to close-out shots and will help bring your scene to life. For the Firefly logo, I quickly used Photoshop and imported a finished image with images planes. After the scene is rendered, I imported the image sequences into DaVinci. I use ACES for my color management to achieve the best possible colors and stick to the industry standard. My first node is noise reduction to minimize the noise of the render. After that comes a base adjustment node in which I adjusted brightness and contrast, followed by another node for a warmer temperature. To make the sign stand out, I used a mask to lighten the area, and an outside node to darken the rest. The game and the series rely on desaturated green, which almost drifts into yellow. I adjusted this via the HSL curves, select the color range and move the sliders. I used a dehaze node to bring a little more clarity into the image. I think it fits well with the post-apocalyptic look. With the node, the blue tones are increased, so I balanced it out again. For a cinematic effect, I used DaVinci's halation node. Normally, halation occurs when developing film in bright areas of the image. It doesn't fit every project, but it works well here. In the new Batman movie, I love the look of the lenses they used. With the 3 nodes, I tried to achieve a similar effect, a slight vignette combined with blurred and warped corners. And as last step, I added film grain to complete the look.
Okay, that's it. I hope you found the video helpful. If you have any questions about any part of the video, please post them in the comments. So, have a great day and thanks for watching.